Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in the interest of time, I do have a couple of questions for General McKenzie. First, following up on Representative Waltz's dialogue earlier regarding basing in the region and the changes we're now going to face with Afghanistan not being there with physical presence on the ground. I think back to just after 9/11, I was in Bahrain. We were planning some of those initial strikes into Afghanistan. The challenge we had was long distances to make those happen. And we had carrier pilots that were flying 8 to 10 hour missions with multiple refuelings to get there. That's obviously going to be a challenge if we find ourselves having to go back in that kind of scale in the future. But in your testimony, you had mentioned pursuing opportunities to enhance expeditionary basing in less vulnerable areas of the AOR. Could you expand a little bit on those and where they may stand?
Certainly. When we talk about that, I am primarily talking about the Iran problem and the fact that our bases now, such as Al Udeid, Al Dhafra, Manama, Bahrain, as you noted, have the virtue of being close to the area you might want to fight. They also have the problem being very close to the Iranians. So what we would seek to do is examine alternatives further to the west in the Arabian Peninsula that would make it more difficult for the Iranians to target our bases there. It would increase the range. Many of their weapons would not actually have the range to reach out there and get to those bases. The problem will be the tanker bill that's associated with that. On the other hand, if the tanker can survive out to the west, it's probably better than it being close where it can be struck. So there's a trade-off that we make. And we look to our partners to help us on this with these bases. And we'd never look to base permanently there. Rather, you'd like to have the ability to go in there, as you noted, in an expeditionary manner in a time of crisis or in a time of war, just to make it harder for an opponent to threaten the force.
Great, thank you. Switching gears to the displaced persons camps in northeast Syria, particularly Al-Nal. I guess from your testimony, General, we talked about 61,000 people there, 94% women and children, 2/3 under 18. I mean, in addition to the obvious humanitarian crisis, I know there's a big problem with the radicalization of a lot of these children. So this, I guess, would be a question for you, General McKenzie, and also Ms. Dorey. What's the way ahead in that? How do we fix this problem? I know a lot of the countries that these people are coming from don't want them back. What's the end game for this?
Sure. So I'll defer to Ms. Dorey here in just a minute, but I will say it is not a military problem, but it will manifest itself in 5 to 10 years as a military problem unless we solve it now, because the children are going to grow up radicalized, and we're going to see them on the battlefields fighting us. So it is an international problem. It requires repatriation. It requires nations to step up to the plate, claim their citizens, bring them home, reintegrate them back into their communities. And it demands de-radicalization, which is extremely difficult to do. It is best done and practiced by nations in the region who have a cultural affinity for the people that are largely in these camps. It's a tough problem. Our diplomats, Department of State, USAID, and a lot of NGOs are working at this very hard. It is one of the most pressing problems we have in the CENTCOM region right now. And with that, I'll defer to Ms. Dorey for anything she'd like to add.
I think General McKenzie put it beautifully. It's not a military problem. It is an interagency issue, and it's a question of political will in terms of host nations for the individuals who are in the camps.
So what pressure do we have that we can apply to get these folks to step up and accept these people? We can't leave them there in the desert forever.
I think it depends on which countries you're talking about and the state of the dialogue with them, what forms of dialogue and leverage we have at our disposal to encourage stepping up to that responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.